All right, so we got one of our highlight topics here for this Thursday edition of ATS.io radio. And Brad, I wanted to talk about handicapping coaches in college football because, in the NFL, there are obviously some very good coaches, some coaches that are below average, and some guys that we would all say are pretty bad. But much like a power ratings gap from 1 to 32 in the NFL, the gap between coaches isn't as significant, I would say, as it is in college football. So, first, before we talk about some specific examples here that you've taken advantage of in this 2020 season, how do you handicap coaches? I mean, how do you quantify, coaches that are better than others, or do you just sort of file it away in the back of your mind and use it maybe as justification for a play more than having some sort of actual statistical analysis of the coaches?
Well, coaches goes into my team power rating. I have a specific column for coaches, and obviously, big difference between a Nick Saban and a first year coach. I always use the example Mike Jinks from Bowling Green from a few years ago. A big difference there. So it goes into the overall team power rating. Now, specifically to this year, when it came to first year coaches, even if I really like the hire, I wasn't big on upgrading that team from a coaching aspect. Say for example, Florida State Mike Norvell, who I think is an upgrade over Willie Taggart from last year. Normally, hey, even though he's a first year coach, upgrade at the coaching spot for that particular category in my power rating. Not the case this year because of the disadvantages specifically to COVID. At least my theory was first year coaches were going to be really behind the eight ball, no spring practices, less actual face to face time with your actual your players. So I wasn't anxious to bet a lot of first year coaches, at least the first couple weeks of the season. Thankfully, that theory is proven to be correct. I mean, first year coaches so far, FBS, FCS, since we're dealing with a lot of those FCS teams playing FBS games. I mean, first year coaches now are 2-8 against the number.
Well, and how long do you expect that to last? I mean, how long do you give these coaches, seeing their teams in action and then having that week of practice? I mean, do you think that this is something that just carries over all the way through 2020, not having spring practices, having kind of the weird camps and lead up to the season, all that? Or do you expect some of these first year coaches to make, the necessary adjustments with their teams and get them into a better spot?
Another great question. Typically, maybe I only use it first couple weeks of the season in normal season. Maybe it's an extra week this year. Or, I mean, case by case basis, we'll see. Maybe some just won't figure it out. The beauty of this year is we have a staggered schedule. So as some of those first year coaches start to make those adjustments, the second game, third game, fourth game, whatnot, we get, ramp up. SEC is going to be playing next week with 4 new coaches. Big Ten's going to have new coaches here in October. So the beauty of it is, it might last all year long where I'm playing against first year coaches just because of a staggered schedule.
Now, I think when we say coaches, people assume that we just mean head coaches. But to me, I really love handicapping the coordinators. That's one of my favorite things to do in the lead up to a college football season. Didn't do as much of that as I typically do because I didn't really expect college football to be played. Didn't want to put in the time. Like I mentioned before, I put in a ton of time in the MLB betting guide back in February. And then, of course, that kind of went up in flames a little bit. So what about coordinators? How do you sort of factor them into this equation?
Depends on how drastic the scheme change is. Although I'll say this, Syracuse had a dramatic scheme change to a 3-3-5, and I thought their defense against North Carolina looked pretty legit last week. So, I mean, theoretically, I would say if you have a drastic scheme change, big time negative. Didn't have time to install that scheme. Didn't have spring practices to actual practice and play on that scheme. So typically while I could do some major upgrades, downgrades, first year coordinators, I'm kind of wait and see right now. I don't have enough data points to make, I think, concrete conclusions.
I think two of the biggest things regarding coordinators are, especially offensive coordinators in particular, when you go to a different kind of tempo, I think that's something where you can find a lot of betting value out there in the marketplace because we have this expectation. You think about a team like Miami, for example, going to Rhett Lashley. We have this expectation that they're going to play faster. And maybe the totals market will adjust. Maybe the totals market won't. But that's something, especially at the group of 5 level. If you get an offensive coordinator, that maybe you're going from a pro style to a spread style with some more tempo, something like that. I think those are things that the market is pretty slow to react on. I hate to put you on the spot here, but off the top of your head, can you think of any teams right now that have had or that you expect to have substantial tempo changes here from what they were last year?
Well, I can tell you right now, your example, Miami's dead on. I mean, we've seen Miami's totals take money now 2 weeks, and you really never, fully know until you see the market making some dramatic changes. But we've seen that from Miami, Group of 5 level, Texas State for me, and actually two teams that played last week, and we saw the total go way over. But we really didn't see a market movement because of COVID issues on both UTSA and Texas State. Spavital at Texas State, he's the head coach. He actually took over the play calling duties. That's where he made his hay. I expect Texas State's offense all year long to be dramatically improved from last year. And UTSA, what we saw was them go from Frank Wilson, a defensive-minded type of coach, to an offensive-minded coach in Traylor. We saw that offense come out, even though limited practice time, first-year coach. I mean, that was the best offensive performance UTSA's had in several years. So those would be two they just played. But I'm not sure. The problem is 51-48. Now people saw that final score, and they're going to be all over it. But I still would, if you tell me blindly play the over on Texas State and UTSA games this year, I think you'll be positive, EV.
Yeah, I watched a good bit of that UTSA-Texas State game, in part because it was such a fascinating game, especially in the second half with UTSA blowing that lead. But they ran the football very effectively. And I like the idea, if you're a really bad team, and I've talked about this before, and I've talked about, maybe some of the teams that are bad in power conferences, maybe trying something like the option. Before Matt Campbell got to Iowa State, I thought, what do you have to lose? At least you get some kind of recruiting advantage if you start running an offense nobody else is running, because you can recruit for that at the high school level. It gives you a chance to pull a Georgia Tech and go 7-6 or 8-4, 8-4 every year, something like that, just because you do something different. I think that's something with the really bad teams. What you've been doing doesn't work. So why the hell not try something dramatically different? And even though UTSA gave up a ton of points last week, I upgraded them 3.5 points in my power ratings because I went, this team has an offense now. They're not going to lose these games 24-7, 31-10. They may be bad, but at least they're going to push things offensively. And I respect that, and I appreciate that. And other teams now have to make an adjustment to UTSA. So that's another element of coaching here that's maybe not quantifiable until you see it. But to me, I think these teams that do something more exciting, I think it does encourage me to either want to play on them or at least value them a little bit higher.
Yeah, I mean, in a normal season, I would be all about offense as a Group of 5. I mean, that's sell tickets in a normal season. And how do you do that? I mean, you go offense, you explosive plays, score some points, and make it exciting football. One that did come to mind, and I don't know if it's going to play out this week against. You look at Western Kentucky. Liberty is talking about going super fast. That's all I read all off season long. I'm not sure the first game's the way to play it. I did play it at Circa. Markets disagreed with me in this one, but I think Liberty, even though they're replacing all-time leading passer, all-time leading receiver for them, all their talk has been up-tempo, up-tempo, up-tempo. Keep an eye on Liberty here in the next couple of games.
Well, again, I think it's definitely very important for us to use these highlight videos on our ATS YouTube page to talk about these different betting concepts, and certainly to have them here on ATS.io radio as well.